my heart was shattered in a million pieces on the floor. And I have never been the same since then. Never. That was like the last thing that God used to say, "You are mine."
Welcome to the Weird Christian Podcast. I am your host, Samuel Delgado, and this is episode 1. I had the honor and privilege of interviewing my pastor, David King of Concord Baptist Church. He shared his testimony, and let me tell you, it is such an amazing story. We get into demonic manifestation, the power of the name of Jesus. We talk about 2020, preaching through this last election cycle, and so much more. So, hope you enjoy it, and with no further ado, let's get weird. Hey David, how you doing?
Hey Sam, doing well.
Good, man. Welcome. Good to have you. I'm so glad. I've been looking forward to this since we spoke last. And since I've come up with a long list of questions for you. So
well, this should be fun then.
I'm put you through the ringer, so to speak. But I'm really excited about this. Probably more than anything, I'm excited to kind of hear your story. As long as you've been my pastor, I've heard you kind of hint, in your sermons and from the pulpit, the change and, how different you are. And, in my mind, I've only seen, this David King as the pastor. And so, I picture, like a Samuel, a prophet that grew up in the tabernacle and got
memorizing the Bible from the time I was a little boy. Yeah.
Right. So hopefully, for myself and some of the listeners, we can kind of get a peek behind the curtain and kind of get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. Let's just start there. Tell us how you grew up and how you came to know Christ.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian home by God's grace, right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. My parents are still living. They're still in town. They're still in the church that they took me to when I was growing up. So I was really blessed to be around an environment growing up where I actually heard about Jesus and heard the gospel story, was around people that seemed to genuinely love me and care for me as a child I grew up in. And so when I was young, I think I was around 7 years old, I remember feeling what Christians will say is a conviction of sin. I felt bad over the fact that I hadn't honored the Lord as I should, that I myself was a sinner. I mean, at a 7-year-old, I think you can keenly feel your sin, even though you've not lived in the world at that age for the most part. I wasn't bar hopping or sleeping around or anything as a 7-year-old, but I had a keen awareness that I was a sinner who was separated from God. And I remember asking Jesus to be my savior. I believe it was even a Friday night, and asked my parents to come into my room, and we prayed together. And man, I was eager from that point on to be public about my faith, to be baptized. And I was baptized not too long thereafter and became an official member of the church. But like so many people who grow up in the church, I had a really hard time as I moved into adolescence, especially the junior high, I would say middle school, but our school was structured with a junior high back then. As I went into junior high and into high school, I was very insecure. I still probably need counseling to figure out where all that came from, because I was in a loving family and a good church, but I was very insecure, and I was dropped into a school environment with a lot of kids who did not know the Lord, and their lifestyle really showed a lot of selfishness and sinfulness. And in my own insecurity and my desire to fit in, I began molding and conforming my life to the way that they were living their lives. And Sam, I don't think you grew up in Chattanooga. I mean, one of the interesting things about Chattanooga, this is going to sound like an aside, but it kind of all connects. One of the interesting things about Chattanooga is there are so many schools around the city. There's a lot of private schools, a lot of public schools. Homeschooling wasn't as big of a deal when I was growing up, but I had a youth group of 70 to 80 kids, so a substantial size youth group. And I only went to school with about 2 of those kids. So it created this really unusual situation in my life where I could live one way at church or be perceived as one way at church and then live a totally different way at school. And nobody really knew. I mean, there was no accountability, no built-in accountability with people that I knew at church because they weren't at my school. So that was an environment that just allowed me to give in to more and more of my sinful inclinations and my desire to fit in and to be liked, and who knows what else was going on there as far as my motivations. But it took me to a really dark place in my life. So as my teenage years progressed, I found myself growing further and further away from the Lord, hardened toward the Lord, giving myself to some sin, just what the Old Testament calls high-handed sins. Like I knew what I was doing and I didn't care. And when I was about 16 or 17, I remember I was coming home from some event and I was standing on my front porch about to walk into my house. And for some reason I was thinking, if I was to die right now, I'd probably go to hell, and I'm okay with that. Wow. So that's the low place that I had sunk to. And it's really interesting. It wasn't long after that, and I'm fuzzy on the years here. I think I was 16 or 17 years old at the time. I got mononucleosis, and of course everybody loved to joke, oh, the kissing disease or whatever. I don't know if you've heard that or not, but
explain a little bit more about exactly what that is.
I don't know much about it, but mono is it's a pretty severe illness where you really have a terrible sore throat to the point that it becomes hard to even swallow, and you're wiped out with a fever, and it can last, not just a few days, but it can last several weeks, over a month. And that's what happened to me. I got mono somehow, and I was bedridden. And my parents said, looking back on it, there was probably a couple of days I needed to be hospitalized. It was so bad. And we just didn't do that. But
yeah,
I remember distinctly one of those nights laying in my bed, so sick. And I had this terrifying dream. Do you mind me sharing all this, Sam? You wanted to hear all this, right?
Yeah, no, I want all the details. Okay. So
I had this terrifying dream, and I won't describe the details of the dream, but I'll say this much. In the dream, I felt as if there was an evil presence, like a satanic presence, that just came over me. And when I woke up from that dream, terrified, that feeling of a satanic presence, I don't know what it was, maybe demonic, was still there. It was like present in my room. I was feeling it. And it was the first time in years that I said Jesus' name, like from my heart. I called out to Jesus. I said, Jesus, save me. Jesus, help me. I don't know why I turned to him. I hadn't cared about him, but he was the one that I knew was stronger, I think, than whatever it was I was experiencing in that moment. And I called on his name. And I really look at that as a turning point from God in my life. I do believe people could say, oh, you're just sick or whatever, delusional. Maybe. But I believe that God allowed me to have that dream, and that God was using that to bring me to himself. There's a passage of scripture in Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews 13. It talks about how the Father disciplines his children. He's a father who loves his children, and because he loves them, he disciplines them. And I think that's what God was doing in my life. He was disciplining me to bring me back to himself. I really do believe I was converted when I was a younger child, around age 7, 8. And because I was God's child, he was saying, you're not going to continue on this path of rebellion. You are mine, and I am going to come and get you. And I think that's what he was doing. So I recovered from mono, and I'm still.
So you had this dream while you were still sick.
Yeah.
You had mono, came down with this dream, and when you say you cried out to God, this is in your mind. You called out, "Jesus, help me." Is that right? Okay, and what happened after? I mean, in that moment.
That's a good question. The feeling that I had of an evil presence in my room, it did go away.
Yeah.
And I think that, that was just something that lodged in my mind. It's like, I called on Jesus, which that was strange to me. What am I doing? And that he seemed to have answered my prayer. But fast forward, a few weeks later, I get past mono. I had to have a tutor come in because I'd missed so much school because I couldn't go to school. I was so wiped out and I got caught up. But then once I'm able to go back to school and get back into my routine of life, I jumped back into all of the sinful things that I had been doing prior to my sickness. But now there was a difference. Now I felt badly about it. So I've got this new conviction again, like my conscience is afflicted now. I don't feel comfortable sinning in the same ways that I had been. And so what I did, not really knowing what to do, was try to clean up my life. And you'll hear me preach about this sometimes, like how people try to do good things to make themselves feel better about the bad things that they do. That's exactly what I was doing. I thought, well, okay, if I can just clean up my language, if I can just stop partying in this kind of a way, if I can break off these certain kinds of relationships that I'm in, then I can feel better about myself. Wow, Sam, you wanted details. That I'm just remembering as I tell this story, there's a lot more details here. How much do you want me to go?
Well, no, I mean, unpack that, because I think that's going to be helpful, for a lot of people. When you say, because certain sin grips people in certain ways. So, when you say that you went home and you said, if I die today, I'm going to hell. That thought just popped into your head. Because, or were you dwelling on sort of your behavior?
I must have been.
Was there some conflict between, what was going on between you in your, school, at life, your social life, versus what was going on at church? Or is this just, you had some clarity to think, if this were to happen, were you so caught up in these sins that you didn't want to give them up, and so you thought, I'll take hell over giving up, kind of what these fleshly desires?
Yeah, that's what I felt in that moment. I don't know what brought me to even think about that in that moment. If I just come home from doing something that I really shouldn't have been doing, or maybe it was the contrast of walking in and having to face my parents again, who were, good Christian parents, and what in the world has happened to their son, who's gone to church his whole life. So I can't really remember
how aware were they of this sinful life that you say you were living? You say partying, you were doing drugs, relationships, premarital sex, language. I mean, is that's what's happening? You're just kind of living a worldly life, kind of trying to fit in and live like everyone else is around you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd probably have to ask my parents. It's amazing, as a parent now, how much that your kids probably don't realize So, I mean, they probably were aware of more than I thought they were, but I still don't think that they grasped the full extent of what I was doing. So I'll tell you what happened, though. I'm trying to clean up my life, kind of this moral improvement project, because I didn't really grasp the depth of the gospel at that point. And so that is a failed project in my life. And I was in a relationship with a girl at the time who had no church background. did not know the Lord. And she starts seeing me changing, like, what's going on with you? And I don't have an answer. So I don't know what's going on with me. I just don't feel good about doing all these things that we've been involved with. And for some reason, she said, I want to come to church with you. I was like, okay. It's like
but she knew that about you, that you were still going to church every
Oh, yeah.
Sunday. You knew you came from a good home.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that you were both kind of
I was
living a sinful life, she kind of she maybe before you could even verbalize it or give witness to it, she kind of attributed some of this change to God or your faith.
Yeah, she saw something. And I think it was God, clearly looking back on it. I did not know that at the time. I couldn't have explained that to her. But this is the Father, I think, rescuing me out of my hardness of heart, and me clueless, not knowing that that's exactly what's happening in my life at this time. But she's as an outsider looking in, going, something is changing and I want to find out more about it. So for her, it's like, can I go to church with you? Was like kind of her way of finding out more about it. For me, that was a terrifying moment, because that's like Mr. Hypocrite David, my two worlds are about to collide here. She's like a bridge, bringing my two lifestyles together. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of scary for me. But long story short, I will make this shorter. She did start coming to church with me, and I'll never forget her meeting with my youth minister at one time. And at the end of that meeting, she came out of the meeting. She was crying and smiling at the same time. And I knew what had happened. I knew she'd gotten saved. She had become a Christian. Yeah. And sure enough, that's exactly what had happened. She's like, I met Jesus. I mean, she was radically changed, like instantaneously. It's one of those like dramatic conversion experiences. She had it. And, the church that I grew up in had, the altar calls where, at the end of a sermon, the pastor will ask people who want to make a decision of one sort or another to come down to the front of the church. And she said, hey, when he does that thing tonight, I want you to come down front with me.
Wow.
And you can only imagine the turmoil in my heart in this moment, because I'm like, great, she's saved. Oh no, this is terrible for my lifestyle. And what does this mean for me? And now she wants me to go down in front of the church that I grew up in. Like, I'm not a stranger here. Everybody knows me here in this church. And I said timidly, yes, okay, I'll go down front with you. But inside I was like, oh, I hope it doesn't happen. And maybe she'll chicken out. And well, man, we got to that moment in the service and she's like, come on. And she walks down front and I go down front with her. And like, she tells the whole church, I've met Jesus. I've become a Christian. And of course the church is like ecstatic over this news. And I don't know, Sam, have you been in a church that does this kind of thing? Like,
yes,
okay.
Yes, I have.
So at the end of the service, what the church members will do is they'll line up. But this is like a throwback in my mind here, especially with COVID this last year. But, church members would line up and come through the line and say something to whoever's up there, whether they've joined the church, become a Christian or whatever. They'd say a little word of encouragement. So there had to be 50 people in that line on a Sunday night, coming through, and they're shaking my hand and they're saying things to me like, David, thank you for being such a good witness to her. Thank you for leading her to Christ. This is so encouraging. It's like they had no clue what they were saying. No clue what they were saying. And within 10 minutes, Sam, 10 minutes of that, my heart was shattered in a million pieces on the floor. And I have never been the same since then. Never. That was like the last thing that God used to say, you are mine and I mean for you to walk with me. And wow, it was just dramatic. So for me, it was a major turning point. I mean, I think I was saved when I was 7 years old, and that was like the last big step of God's fatherly discipline in my life, where he showed me his glory again in a way that now on the other side of all of that sin, I could see his grace, his mercy, his love, and it changed my life. I've never been the same.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. It really honestly reminds me a lot of my own story, which I kind of gave you like the skim over. But yeah, it's very similar to kind of my own. So how long? I'm going to unpack it a little bit. How long was she attending church with you? Was this the first time, or had
No.
she been coming to church with you for a while?
I can't remember exactly. It probably was only a span of about 2 to 3 months. So a
Right.
relatively short amount of time.
And she was just going with you like Sunday service in the morning, or just like youth group at
I think it was
night?
youth stuff at night mainly. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And I want to
So
say
and
this as a like kind of a postscript because I think it's cool. We realized really quickly we didn't need to stay in our relationship together. And so we broke that off. And she went on, she married a really strong Christian guy and raised a family. She doesn't live in this area anymore. And last I heard is still loving Jesus, walking with him. And I praise God for that.
yeah, I mean, one thing I can say, and you mentioned it about your stories, you can kind of see God's hand throughout your life and how He used certain events to draw you closer to Him. And that's amazing that she was able to come to Christ in that same way, in the middle of your sin, right? It just amongst it, and
Mm-hmm.
He was able to pull you both out. And it's just incredible. He can kind of you know draw you close. Yeah, however means. Now, when you say that you had, you know, grown comfortable with this idea of dying, going to hell, um, would you had you made a decision to renounce your faith at that time, or like would you still would have called yourself a Christian at that time? You were just so gripped, um, by your flesh that you were just hardened a little bit. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I was very hardened. And, if somebody had asked me, are you a Christian in the middle of all that? I think I would have said yes. I think I would have said yes, but
Right.
I would have
Yeah.
known internally, well, I'm like the worst Christian there possibly could be. But
Right. Yeah. Right.
yeah, I
Um,
hadn't come to the point of like renouncing Jesus. I guess that would be the next step and the last step I could have taken. And oh, by God's grace, yeah, he didn't let me go there.
right.
Yeah.
And so this dream that you had, really, it, I don't know, you're welcome to go into details if you want, of the dream. But from what I'm gathering, it really was more than a dream. It seems like this was, you think you were being tormented
I think it was
by.
more than a dream. Yeah. Just because when I woke up, I still had those same feelings like in my room. Yeah. I don't think I need to go into the details of it. Just
Yeah.
because I don't want to glorify Satan in any way. I mean, Jesus really is stronger. He put his foot on Satan's neck. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, that's, but I think that does highlight that, when you open yourself up to sinful activity, demon or Satan or whatever it may, they can attach themselves. You really open yourself up, to that demonic realm, and you hear about those entities and those um, demons, tormenting, at night during your sleep. And so that's, it's amazing to see that really this was a one-time thing for you, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And just, immediately as a Christian, you knew to call on the name of Jesus. And within your story, you showed that Jesus has power over, those entities. So that's incredible. So moving forward, you graduate. Did you when did you know you wanted to be a pastor? When did you decide to pursue this as a career?
Yeah. So it was probably within a year after that last event that I just described, where God just broke my heart. It was probably within that next year. I was a senior in high school, coming up on graduation. I remember driving down Gun Barrel Road. For those who are listening, who are from Chattanooga, you'll know Gun Barrel. But this was 1988 or so. It was a 2-lane road through the woods. If you can picture that, that's mind blowing. And I'm driving down Gun Barrel Road in my dad's pickup truck. And for some reason, I've got the radio on to this preacher. I never used to listen to preaching on the radio, but now it's like I can't get enough of the Bible. I love Jesus. And here's this guy preaching the Bible on the radio. I'm going to listen to this. And it was one of those sermons where I just felt like the Spirit was speaking to me. And I know most Christians have had this kind of experience, maybe multiple times as they've been worshiping and, hearing the word preached. It's like God's speaking to me through his word. And that was what that sermon was like for me. The guy was preaching on, and I don't even know who the preacher was, but he was preaching on Jeremiah chapter 1, the call of Jeremiah to be a prophet. And I'm just like in the zone with this guy. It's like, wow, I think the Lord's talking to me through this. And Jeremiah gave 2 excuses to the Lord about how he couldn't be a prophet. He said, I'm too young and I don't know what I would say. And I realized as I'm listening to this sermon that I'm like having this same God's to do something in his name, to be a minister of some sort. And I'm sitting there responding, God, I'm too young for that. I'm a senior in high school and I don't know what I would say.
Right.
But
yeah,
it was at the end of that sermon. By the end of that sermon, I knew the Lord wanted me to be in the ministry. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I knew he wanted me to be in the ministry. And I had gotten home at that point, ran into my bedroom, listened to the end of the sermon on my radio in my bedroom. And by the end of that sermon, I had my Bible open. I was on my knees by my bed and said, okay, God, I'm too young. I don't know what I'd say, but if this is what you're calling me to do, I'll do it. I'm yours. And so that set me on a course, headed towards college, where I knew ministry of some sort was going to be in my future.
Awesome. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So when you went off to college, did you know you were going to study theology at that point, or did that come after you enrolled?
I just knew ministry. And this is embarrassing, but I mean, it's probably a common story for kids who grow up in the church, but I did not have a doctrine of the church. I didn't have, what we call an ecclesiology. So in my mind, I just felt like God's called me into the ministry. So I need to study Bible of some sort. I probably need to go to seminary because that's what you do after you go to college. If you're going to be in the ministry, it's good to go to seminary, get a master's degree. I'll probably start in youth ministry and just see where it goes from there. That's kind of how I was thinking about everything, which, isn't altogether bad, but it's kind of sad. I didn't have a doctrine of the church. And by God's grace, again, by the time I hit seminary, I remember hearing a pastor who came and lectured, and he lectured on the doctrine of the church. And it was the first time really that I could remember, maybe I'd heard it before and just didn't remember, but it's the first time that I could remember hearing a man open the word of God, talk about what the church is, that Jesus had come into the world to purchase this bride for himself. that he shed his blood for the church, and that he's actually given us instructions about how the church is supposed to be ordered and led. I don't know why I didn't know that, but somehow all that had escaped me. But here's this man just opening God's word and passionately talking about the church. And that was the event, I guess, that God used to make it clear to me, oh, God's calling me not just to this vague concept of ministry in his name. He's calling me to be a pastor in his church. And that's where it got really exciting for me, because I felt like everything became really focused. Like, I'm meant to be a pastor. And so now there's some like handles you can get a hold of there. It's like, what does it mean to be a pastor biblically? And I want to learn about that. And I want to try to grow into that and see what doors God opens. And God did open doors. I did have a chance to do part-time ministry stuff, but it was not long after I graduated from seminary that I was able to be on a pastoral staff at a church in Birmingham, Alabama, and did that for about 5 years in different capacities on staff, and then ended up coming to the church that I serve now in Chattanooga, and have been here as the senior pastor for 20 years.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's amazing how in your own story that, God used the local church and, these sermons that spoke to you at different points, that, kind of got you on a path. So the church that you grew up in, did you go to Brainerd Baptist here in Chattanooga?
I did.
Okay. And you said your parents are still attending Brainerd.
They are. They've been very actively involved, have a lot of good friends, and they've been really faithful Christian people over the years.
Yeah. So does a part of you wish they would attend Concord? Because
I told them they couldn't.
Oh, okay. Because you don't want them to. Why did you tell them?
Yeah, I said, I've been your son. I can't be your pastor.
Okay.
And I was also thinking about them. I mean, the nature of pastoral ministry, if you're not on staff, you're going to hear critiques about the pastors. And it's like, my parents don't need that. I'm going to do some things that, that make people confused or frustrated or even upset at different times. I'm not meaning to, by the way, just want to be clear about that, but I know that's going to happen.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't want my parents to have to deal with that, and besides the fact, I don't think they would have joined here anyway. I mean, they're so long connected at Brainerd.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have made sense for them to move. Yeah.
So you said, you mentioned a couple different sermons that you listened to. So that actually had, I wanted to ask you about, who are the pastors that have most influenced you, or is there any sort of, because at Concord you do something called expository preaching. Is there a certain pastor that inspired you to do that? Mm-hmm. How did that come about, and what are some preachers or pastors that maybe you have been influenced by?
Well, that's a really big question. I want to give a shout out to a couple of professors, first of all, because they were very instrumental in my life, just thinking about the Bible. But one was my Old Testament professor, Ken Matthews, has a great 2-volume commentary on the book of Genesis. It's just masterful. But his approach to the Old Testament and helping me see what was there was just super helpful to me in a formative way. And then a New Testament professor I had, Frank Thielman, another just outstanding teacher. And that combination of those men in my seminary years was just very potent in helping me grasp the unity of Scripture and to begin to see things that have always been there, but had just been lost on me. I just missed it, but just made the Bible come alive. So I thank God for them. Pastors, though, I didn't really know much about what we call expositional preaching, but I heard probably my first exposure to a preacher like that I mentioned this in a sermon just a couple of weeks ago for some reason, but I was in a discipleship group at Stanford University, and my discipleship leader gave me these cassette tapes to listen to. Sam, do you know what a cassette tape is?
Yeah.
Well, he gave me these cassette tapes of sermons to listen to, and the sermons happened to be on 1 Timothy 3, which, if you're familiar with that passage, is about qualifications for elders, qualifications for deacons. And the first sermon was on like 1 Timothy 3, verse 1. And here's this preacher, he's just walking through verse 1 and he's explaining what's there. He's illustrating it, and then he's making application to our day. It's like, wow, this is so clear, so helpful, so good. And then he moved from verse 1 to verse 2, and he did the same thing again. He explained what was there. He gave some illustrations to help you see it, and then he made application. It's like, wow, this is incredible. And then guess where he went after verse 2? Verse 3. And he just kept walking through the text like that. And I had never really heard preaching like that. And I loved it. I loved it. It's like, I am looking at God's word and I'm having it explained to me in a way that connects to my life and our day. And it was just like life for me. That guy's name, by the way, was John Mcarthur. I'd never heard of him before, but most people will hear that name and it'll be familiar to them. The second person that I would mention was a British pastor. He was an older guy, and he had come as a guest preacher at the church where I was going during college. And his name was Stephen Olford. And Stephen Olford, man, he just had a powerful way with God's word. He was a really good speaker, and he did exposition as well, where he would take a passage and he would just walk you through the passage, explaining what was there and applying it to your life, applying it to the church, applying it to our world. And he just did that excellently. And so here it was, again, it's like soul stirring preaching. It's like, oh man, I love this. A third pastor that was probably, definitely the most instrumental in me and helping me understand like the nature of the church, was a pastor named Mcarthur, who, in God's providence, I'm friends with now. I'm really thankful for that. He's got a great ministry that our church actually supports, and our church here has benefited from tremendously over the years, called 9 Marks. But Mark was super helpful as a pastor, just helping me to think about not just the preaching event, but what it means to shepherd people and to care for people's souls, and how, church isn't just about, giving the good sermon, though that's vital that we preach God's word clearly and well. We want to do that the best that we possibly can. But church also it's a flock. And we are under shepherds under the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ. And we're meant to tend to the souls of the flock, caring for them and their spiritual well-being. It's not just about how many people can we get here and how big's our budget going to be next year and what are all the awesome events and programs we can run. No, church it's like the body of Christ. It's the family of God, and pastors are given as gifts to the church to help shepherd their souls and tend them. We do that primarily through truth, but also, equipping them for the work of the ministry where they learn how to care for each other, and then just pastoral ministry to them, especially when they're in need or crisis, things like that. So that was another pastor that was just hugely instrumental in my formation as a pastor. I'll mention one other and I'll stop, but John Piper was a big influence on my life. Somebody gave my wife this book back in 1995 or 6 called Desiring God. And I don't know if she read it, at least not then, but I did. I took her birthday gift and I started reading that book, and I was like, oh my goodness, I already had a high view of God's sovereignty over all things. But, Piper had a way of talking about having your joy in this God. And the more you enjoy God, the more he is actually glorified in your life. And it took me a while to wade through that book. I didn't have anybody to help me understand it, and I'm kind of slow, so it took me time. But as I began to grasp what he was talking about, it was like dropping a match in gasoline for me. And so as I had opportunity to hear him preach, I took every opportunity I could get. And he's just one of those men that the Spirit uses for me to stir my heart, and to encourage me to worship God in all of his glory, and to love Christ, and to say no to sin, and to pursue righteousness. So I think I just mentioned about 6 people, and I better stop there. But those would be some of the key influencers in my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to talk about your preaching, because in a lot of ways, you are, you're the face of our church. People are attracted, I think, to our church. One of the reasons is because of your preaching. And you talk to people at Concord, they have confidence that our pastor is going to lead us in truth, and people have a hunger and a desire for that. And your preaching in particular. You preach the word of God, seemingly, and however uncomfortable that may be. And I know you mentioned earlier, you dealt with insecurities in high school. So I want to talk about, what it's like being a pastor and in preaching some of these uncomfortable topics, because I've heard you preach on Nephilim, racism, prejudicism, sexuality, gender. You preach through the book of Revelation. So I feel like you really fit the mold for like the Weird Christian podcast. You preach through Ecclesiastes. You just did a series on, not your Hallmark Christmas. And so, it seems that you're not afraid to go there, where the word is, uncomfortable. And so speak on, does that come natural to you? Did you have to fight through some insecurities of dealing with some of those topics? You speak to that.
That's a great question. My short answer is, and this is going to sound like, oh, that was just the right Christian thing to say, but I really believe this. God has inspired his word. I really believe that this is God's word to us. And so this is good. And even if it's hard, or it pushes against us, or the culture would say, that's not right, this other thing is true, and it's just the opposite of what your Bible says. I believe this is God's word to us. So it's true, and it gives us life, and it's good for us, even if we don't fully understand it all. So if I can see something in God's word, and here's the key for me, as far as my own fear of man and insecurity, if I can see something clearly in God's word, my fear level decreases. The more you move me away from God's word, like even like a jagged line path to an application, the further away we get from what seems very clear to me in God's word, my fear of man increases. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
so
go ahead.
Because it's truth.
Yeah.
That gives you confidence, and you can separate your own fears between, what is true, God's word. Yeah. So, that makes total sense.
So, I'm not a fearless man. I've had to wrestle a lot with the fear of man. In fact, there was a point in my ministry, probably a little over a decade ago, I began telling some of the brothers that I was in groups with, like, hey, pray for me about fear of man. I really need the Lord to uproot some of that in my heart. And a lot of times, people are happy to pray for me about that, but I don't think they fully understood, like, what? You're afraid of man? It's like, yeah. You're standing up in front of people and you're saying things that they're not going to always understand, or they're not going to like, or the culture is saying is not true. And it's going to make you look bad in some way. And that can cause stress. It can cause hesitation. And, as a preacher of the word of God, that needs to be killed in my flesh. I will serve the church best the more fearless I become about God's word. Even if they don't like what I'm saying, if I can show it's right here, that will serve the church the best.
Awesome, man. So we have a very diverse age range in our church. We are, multi-generational. That comes with its challenges. And I'm proud to be a part of a church that doesn't just cater to a certain demographic. So with that being said, we have a predominantly white church. Why do you think that is? And what do we need? Do we need to do anything differently to appeal to other ethnic groups?
Okay, that's a hard question. And it's a great one following the question about fear of man. One answer, just practically speaking, we have a predominantly white church because we live in a predominantly white community. That's not a cop-out. I think it's just reality. It's hard to have a multi-ethnic church in a largely mono-ethnic cultural setting.
Right.
So there's that. I don't mean for that to be a cop-out, though. I would love to see God diversify our membership. And the reason that I would love to see that is because I think that's what the gospel is meant to do. I think the gospel is meant to tear down barriers that are naturally there between people and classes of people or ethnicities or even, socioeconomic barriers. I think the gospel really can unify people across all of those human barriers that we feel. So for that reason, I would love to see more diversity in our church. How do you go after that in addition to prayer? Like, I think we should pray about that. God, what do you want this to look like? And will you make it happen? I think that's where we start. And I think that's the fuel of it. But in addition to that, which is what I think you're asking, what steps would you take? I don't know. I think there's some steps that could be taken that would honor the Lord. And that would be like an openness in our everyday lives to develop relationships and friendships with people that are outside our normal range of friendships. I like cross an ethnic line to make a friend and let the gospel do its work on a personal level there. And I think that would over time translate into some really nice, more natural ways of seeing diversity grow in a congregation, because we actually are living somewhat diverse lives outside of the church.
Right. Yeah.
There's other practical things that could be done. Like if there was a way to diversify leadership, like if you have to make a staff hire, we have been open to that. We've prayed about that even in the last couple of hires that we've made, and God in his providence just hasn't worked that out for us. So that's a hard question. I wish I had,
there's no easy answer.
I wish I had a good answer for that. I do look forward to the day, like we heard in Revelation this last Sunday. There's coming a day where we'll stand before the throne, every tribe, tongue, language, and nation. And I just like to have a foretaste of that more here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think that's true for probably most of our members as well. And I think what you said is all true. All right, I have some more. I have a lot of other questions here. So let me see. How do you think our community sees us, and do we have a reputation as a church?
You mean East Brainerd, Chattanooga?
Concord. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't know if you get any thought about that. I mean, I have a coworker that said to me one time, there's three of us, and he said, Sam, he goes to Concord, so he's a real Christian. He said something like that to me, and it made me feel good. But of course, we're in the church, so we don't necessarily we can't really see it from the outsider's point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I'd had a better idea. I mean, the things that I do hear, I'm being told the things that I hear probably because they are either benign or complimentary. You know, most people aren't going to walk up to me and just say something bad, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah, of course.
what I do tend to hear is that we seem to be a church that people understand, take God's word seriously. So, I mean, if that's true, then I'm happy about that. I do hear frequently that we tend to be a friendly church, and I know that in some ways we're not, and we drop the. I'm very thankful for that. And then I'll talk to people who have no clue who Concord is. They live right here. They don't even know. And you know what I always tell them, Sam? I said, do you know where Baskin Robbins is? And they're like, oh, that church across from Baskin Robbins. Yeah. Yeah, that's us. We're Concord, right across from Baskin Robbins.
That's actually what you just said is kind of a good lead into my next question. And what's the biggest area of growth for our church, you think?
Ways that we have grown or we need to grow?
Need to grow.
Okay.
You can answer the first one as well, if you want.
I would say a way that we need to grow is probably more natural prayer for and with one another. We work at prayer a lot. I mean, we encourage it a lot, but for some reason that's hard for people. And I haven't quite put my finger on what makes that so hard for us, but I would love to see our church become more of a praying church, not just from the platform in a worship service, but I mean, in our relationships with each other. Like we're willing to share like more personal things that are going on in our lives and just say, hey, will you pray for me about this? And for your brother or sister, not just say, yeah, I'll pray for you about that, but actually pray together. Like take a minute, pray with each other.
Let's go ahead and pray.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I think along those same lines, probably more willingness to be open and real about just what's going on in our lives. I don't mean just bear all of your sins, but you know, even the good things, like here's what the Lord's really teaching me right now. And to have kind of a more transparent, authentic Christian faith that we don't just privatize. We're able to like communicate about our love for Jesus, our struggles in following Jesus, and that there's enough of us doing that together that's like, oh, this is just Christianity. You know, we're being sanctified together. I would love to see that become more natural. And then one big one, and I saved this for last, is I would love to see more people come to know Jesus Christ who don't know the Lord. We pray about people being converted. We preach the gospel as clearly as we can, but I just love to see more people, you know, from our community, through our relationships, coming into the church, experience new life in Jesus, like where they're changed. I'm eager for that to happen.
Awesome. Thank you for that. If you could go back and visit yourself as a young pastor, just starting out, what would you tell yourself?
I wish I'd had that question in advance to really think through that. Sam, you should do a podcast because these are really good questions. I think I would tell my young self. What would I tell my? Hey, can I come back to that?
Come back to that.
That is a great question.
Do you have what's your biggest regret as a pastor, or do you have one?
Where do I start on that? Okay, I'm not sure how I'd answer that.
If it doesn't come immediately, that's okay. There's like just one kind of thing that if I could just go back, I would have done that differently.
I can think of like specific instances, like I wish I would have led differently. Like I wish I would have like led in a different sequence of events, or I wish I would have managed a situation differently. I can think of little things like that along the way. there's probably a long list of those.
Yeah.
But like a big picture thing, I would say, well, you've got me here, Sam. I'm going to be chewing on this, and I'll probably want to come back to you and answer these questions in about a week.
Okay.
So
we can maybe do a part two.
yeah.
If you weren't a pastor, what would you do? And do you see yourself retiring as a pastor? Or do you have other aspirations?
Oh no, I don't see myself doing anything else. I mean, the only other thing I could see myself doing, like supplementary to pastoral ministry, would be teaching of some sort. I love teaching God's word.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite things is our Wednesday nights, where I could just walk through books of the Bible and do it in a Q&A format with people who are there. And I love the give and take of that dynamic. And,
Yeah.
so being in a classroom maybe at some point would be just, I think, a ton of fun.
Yeah, I think you're naturally a teacher.
Yeah.
What does a typical day at work look like for you?
I don't have a typical day. I mean, it depends on what day of the week it is, because there's just kind of different rhythms throughout the week. Starting on Sunday, first day of the week, I am up super early and finishing up all the stuff for my sermon for that morning. There's been a long process leading up to that. That's not where I start getting ready for my sermon. Just want to be clear about that. But, finishing up stuff for my sermon Sunday morning, and then preaching. And then usually a lot of Sundays, there'll be some other kind of meeting or something that I need to do later in the day. So Sundays are pretty big days. Mondays, we have staff meeting on Monday morning, and this is a chance for all the guys to get together and kind of debrief and look ahead for the week and see what we need from each other, so that we can be a support to one another in getting things done. And then I usually have visits that I make on Monday, or I'm getting some initial thoughts together for the upcoming sermon or whatever I'm teaching. Tuesday is more of a study day, although I usually have one or two like counseling appointments sprinkled in there. Wednesday, we have a Wednesday live event that we do on Facebook. That's going to transition in just about 2 to 3 weeks, where we go back to a Wednesday night teaching environment. So I'm finishing up administrative stuff on Wednesday, trying to get all of that done, and then getting ready to teach. Then Thursday is largely dedicated to sermon prep. So that's what I try to get myself to on Thursdays. Then Friday, that's my day off. I set it down and I spend time with my family. And then by Saturday night, I'm worthless. I'm done with family, and my head is so in church world that, I'm usually working all of Saturday night before I go to bed.
Wow.
And then Sundays.
Okay, so you have more typical week than typical day.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads me into my next question. 2020 and all the changes that came with that. So what were some of the biggest challenges to adapting to 2020? And how do you see things moving forward? I know you mentioned we're switching back Wednesday night. But does anything, is anything going to be permanently differently? Are we going to do anything different, now that we've kind of already adapted, to 2020? But start, just kind of walk us through, last spring, and the challenges and how we were able to kind of adapt and do things differently, and then moving forward, what it looks like.
Yeah. David Rayner, one of the pastors on our staff, talked to a pastor that he had served under years ago, who has been in the ministry at the same church for like 40 years, if I'm not mistaken. Can you imagine that? Like, he's
Wow.
given his entire adult pastoral ministry to this one congregation, and it's been a great church. But he said this guy had been in his church for 40 years, that this past year was the hardest year of pastoral ministry he's ever had. And that just gives you a little perspective from a pastoral point of view. We've had some hard years, definitely, in the 20 years that I've been here. But yeah, pastorally speaking, this last year has been super hard. And I would say for two reasons. One, I have this really strong understanding of the church as a gathering. The church is a body. The church is a family, which is why we've prioritized over the years, one worship service. And I'm not saying that churches that decide to do multiple worship services in campuses are in sin. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying for us, we are working out our understanding of the doctrine of the church by trying to keep everybody together as one. And last year blew that up. Just totally blew it up. And when we were able to begin regathering, I think we decided to do that 3 months into the pandemic after the shutdown initially. We came back with what has become not one service, but 4 services plus an online venue. So nothing has been like what I've been accustomed to and believed in for 20 years here at Concord. And that's not just me. I think the church feels that. I mean, they valued being all together, and now they're picking one service out of 4 if they come on campus, and they don't know who else is coming to the other services, who's not coming that used to come, all the changes. Everybody's just isolated in new ways and fragmented in ways we've never experienced before. That's been a huge challenge. The other challenge this past year has been what every church has faced. I know people having very strong opinions about the pandemic itself and how to move through it responsibly, from mask to social distancing to, the timing of how you make changes. This has not been a year where you could just point to a Bible verse, which I feel good about, and say, here's what God's word says. Let's do this. It's been a year where we've had to apply wisdom, and we've had to make judgment calls, like actual judgment calls. Like, are we doing it the right way? Well, I don't know if there's like a right versus a wrong way. We're making judgment calls here. And some people within our own church are going to see it really differently than what we're doing, but we've got to make a decision. We've got to do something. And so that's been so challenging, just encouraging the church and feeling it in my own heart too. Like, let's work at what the Bible says about not judging each other over matters of opinion, and what the Bible says about love, believing the best about one another. Because somebody is approaching the pandemic or looking at it differently than you, doesn't mean that they're a bad person. I mean, how can you believe the best about them? What might be their motivations and how they're thinking through things? Even if you disagree with them, you could probably quickly come to a place where you are given the benefit of the doubt or attributing good motivation to your brother or sister in Christ. So that's just been challenging.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because numbers seem to be going down. I'm optimistic because it has been a year, and I think people are willing to take more worthy risk to restore good fellowship with each other. I'm optimistic because the vaccine, I think, seems to be somewhat effective and helpful. Time will tell on that, but I think there's just a lot of things trending in a helpful direction for us to keep making incremental changes back toward one gathering. We're a ways off from that, but our plan here at church initially is like these next 3 months, March through May, we want to meet outdoors as much as we can, because that affords us to get back together as one. In June, we are considering moving one of our services to a less restricted environment for those who feel comfortable, but we'll still leave the other options for those who don't feel as comfortable. But we want to keep slowly pushing the church back to one gathering. So it's going to take time, but I am optimistic that I'm hoping maybe even by this fall, if we could get there, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear your heart there. So that leads me to my next question. Approaching November, as a country, we've been pretty divided. And that's true for many people, even within our local church. So how do you manage your personal political convictions with preaching amongst this political climate? And what is the church's role in local in politics in general?
Oh man, this is another let me come back to you in a week kind of question. I would have to say, Sam, this year has caused me, when I say this year, I mean this last political cycle, has caused me to have to really evaluate my preaching philosophy with regard to politics. And for good or for ill, at least this past cycle, I've really kind of doubled down on my current or on my previous practice of, I'm going to try not to say anything from the pulpit, or even really, I've not even said anything just in conversation with people. I'm going to try not to say anything that lets people know like who I'm voting for. Not because I don't have an opinion about these things. I do have opinions about these things, but I think it's been important for me as a pastor to guard my role as a pastor in a contentious situation, to be able to keep speaking God's word, hopefully, to people in as nonpartisan a way as I can. And I'm sure, people who are closer to me can guess like what I think about certain things, but I have intentionally kept those cards close to my vest because I feel like it might serve my pastoral ministry better. It might serve the church better if I do so. Another thing that's been helpful to me is making a distinction between what a friend of mine has called straight line and jagged line issues. Have you heard this phrase? Have I mentioned this at church before?
I don't think so.
Okay, so straight line, jagged line issues. I think if Christians could understand straight line, jagged line issues, it would help their relationships. It would help unity in the church. Yeah, I think it would bring more love and peace to a congregation. But what I mean is a straight line issue is an issue in scripture that you could draw a straight line to contemporary application. You don't even have to do like much interpretation there. It's like, oh, I totally see where you're getting this from. An example here would be abortion. A Christian, I just picked that one because it's kind of obvious. Like a Christian who understands that God creates life. There's a pretty straight line from that biblical teaching to a civic application. Oh, we don't need to support abortion. Versus a jagged line issue. A jagged line issue is it's like we see what scripture says, but in order to get to an application, we have to follow kind of several moves. It's like a jagged line. It's like if you follow my reasoning, like if I can unpack it for you, you can see how I arrived at this application. But it's not a straight line from what's in the text to that application. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
And
totally.
I mean, to continue with that same example that I was given about abortion, one Christian might say, okay, well, to oppose abortion, everybody ought to support a crisis pregnancy center. Well, maybe not. Absolutely. That's a great thing for a Christian to do, support a crisis pregnancy. We've got a lot of people in our church who do that. And our church even supports one in our city gladly. But is that an ought for every Christian? Like every Christian ought to support a crisis pregnancy center? No, I don't think so. It's a jagged line issue. Another one would be like protesting abortion in front of an abortion clinic. Some Christians feel like, yeah, this is the way that I should oppose abortion. I'm going to protest in front of an abortion clinic. Well, that Christian could do that in faith, but that Christian needs to understand that that is a jagged line application that should not be imposed on other Christians. Like they ought to do it this way. Am I making sense? Please help me here, Sam.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So out of the realm
well
of abortion, you can go into any other, civic issue as controversial as you want to be. Like, how do you deal with racism or the role of women in society, or on LGBTQ stuff, and how do we relate to church church families who have, relatives who are coming out as homosexual, and it just raises all kinds of questions, many of which are not a straight line from what we see in Scripture to what every Christian ought to do. There's a lot of jagged line stuff, and I think if we can learn to make wise, discerning differences between straight line and jagged line issues, it'll help us give grace to other Christians who are maybe ending up in a different place, or they're choosing a different path, or they're making a different decision. It doesn't mean that they're not a Christian or they're a horrible person. They're working out that jagged line differently. So some things aren't jagged lines, some things are straight lines, and they shouldn't be made jagged. But my experience in our context is that there's a lot of things that are probably jagged lines that people would rather just treat as a straight line, so that they can classify everybody and make sure they know who's in what tribe. And we need to think more carefully biblically in that way.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's see. I'm kind of getting into some more lighthearted stuff here. So you reference Tolkien and C.S. Lewis a lot in your sermons. So I don't think it's a stretch to see. No, that's okay. I think many of our members appreciate that. So I was going to say, I don't think it's a stretch to say you're a little bit of a nerd. So what is the nerdiest thing about you?
Oh, the nerdiest thing about me? I mean, if like reading fiction makes me a nerd, yeah, I'm a nerd. I like good fiction. I don't just read anything, but I like literature. That's pretty nerdy.
So that's one of my questions. What's favorite books of yours?
Well, I mean, I've loved The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I've loved C.S. Lewis, a lot of his essays, but even the Chronicles of Narnia, man, they're just loaded with really helpful stuff. There's been other various like novels that have been meaningful to me over the years. Mystery. Oh man, somehow I got on Arthur Conan Doyle. I've read all the Sherlock stuff probably 3 or 4 times. There's like 56 short stories and 4 novels that he wrote. I've read them all like multiple times. I've loved stuff like that. Another nerdy thing, and this is like really nerdy, is I don't really watch TV. I'm the kind of person like, if you put me in front of a TV, I could get sucked in and like go down the rabbit hole and just make a wreck out of my life. So, by God's grace in my life through different ways, I've come to a place where I just don't even really watch TV at all. I mean, I watch football during football season. I do like football, but that's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, that was one of my next questions. What are your favorite movies? I don't know if that means that you don't watch a lot of movies, but are any, obviously there's movies from Tolkien's work and C.S. Lewis' work. Do you have any other movies that you love?
I didn't really care for the Narnia movies. Actually, I did like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. I enjoyed that. Not The Hobbit, not so much for some reason. The first movie I remember seeing, and this is going to date me, but 1977, I was 7 years old. Oh man, we need a fact check here. It could have been 78. I think it was 1977. I was 7 years old. I went to Star Wars in the theater when it was first released. And we didn't go to many movies, and my parents got us there on time, which on time for a blockbuster movie is late because there's no seats left. And the only seats left in the whole theater were on the very front row. And I remember, as a kid, a 7-year-old sitting on the front row, and the opening scene where that Star Destroyer flies over and just keeps coming coming and coming. And, I wish I could see my face as the 7-year-old little boy watching that. I was like, oh, and so, you leave a movie like that and you're like trying to draw stormtroopers, and it's like your whole life is just opened up to this galaxy far, far away. I mean, that was pretty instrumental in my young life.
Yeah. No, I love hearing that because it's still popular today. People like me, I guess it was re-released, but you can't
Yeah.
recreate that experience that you did.
Yeah.
Seeing something that had never been done before.
I would say,
Um,
just on this same topic of movies, I mean, one movie that I've really enjoyed, I hesitate to even mention movies because I'm not endorsing everything in the movie. Like, oh, this is
no, of
great.
course,
But
yeah. I'm just
there was
lighthearted.
an old movie called Hunt for Red October, which I just
Mm-hmm.
think is a really cool story. I think it's a good story, and I enjoyed that movie. And I'm going to acknowledge this. And I know this is like very debatable, but I watched Pride and Prejudice with my wife, and I really enjoyed it. And and since then, I've read the book. Like Jane Austen is a great writer, and Pride and Prejudice is just like a delightful and I think even an instructive novel in many ways. So there you go. I'm nerding out.
That's on my watch list now. Now I'm inspired
Yeah.
to go and actually watch it. Music. Do you have favorite artists? Types of music. What do you like to listen to when you listen to music?
At this point in my life, I'm pretty eclectic. I had a classical piano background, so on my playlist right now on Spotify, I've got a playlist called Hoity Toity, and it's just like classical music, music that I think is more technical and it really engages me, like in more than just oh, that sounds good kind of a level. It's like I understand kind of what's going on with the music. Like it's just fascinating to me.
Wow.
But from there to like more a really eclectic range of stuff. Like I love Andrew Peterson's music and Sarah Groves, and to more of a oh man, my playlist is so crazy, Sam. Colony House. Um, I've got all kinds of selections of like what we would call secular music, not Christian music, but just a kind of a wide array of stuff. I don't put things on my playlist that are they're gonna get in my head in a way that takes me away from Christ. Like I've had to like remove some songs from my playlist because it's not a Christian song, but not only is it not a Christian song, it's saying things that are like getting into my head that they're not true. And I don't want to go there. So I do listen to a lot of secular music, but I'm very selective about that. I grew up on rock and roll, like Van Halen. I could list several bands, but I've got a wide array of music interest.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. Do you have a favorite Bible character?
Bible character?
Yeah.
Not like you can't pick Jesus, right?
Yeah. I mean, other than Jesus, yeah.
I don't have a favorite Bible character. However, just thinking about it off the top of my head, I have been enamored with Daniel over the years. And I think because, here's this young guy, and we don't know exactly how old he was, but like he's ripped out of his home and his land, and he's taken into this foreign government, and he's educated in the ways of Babylon. Like he receives this amazing education, but it's not a Jewish theocentric education. Um, and he finds a way to honor God in the midst of that context. And he does so from a heart that's devoted. Like when that prayer edict is passed, I mean, he's going to his room and he's praying 3 times a day. Like here's a devout
Yeah.
man. And it makes him fearless. We talked about fear of man. I mean, he's gonna face a den of lions over this. And I mean, God just miraculously rescues him, which God didn't have to do. God would still have been faithful if he hadn't rescued Daniel. But that's an amazing character in the Bible to me. So I'll tell you one more now that we're talking about it. A little known guy named Benaiah in the Old Testament. Have you heard of him?
It's not ringing any bells.
No, probably not. Benaiah
not.
was one of David's mighty men. I've loved Benaiah over the years. This is interesting, that theme of fearlessness again. There's one verse about Benaiah. Every time you see Benaiah in the Old Testament, he's doing something good. You just see the little like snapshots of him along the way about 3 or 4 times. And he's doing something noble. But one of the verses that first turned me on to Benaiah, it says something like, Benaiah went down into the pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. It's like, that dude is bad to the bone. I mean, that is a cool dude. Like, you start picturing, like, he intentionally did this, like he went into a pit like on a snowy day, meaning like this is like even extra dangerous because of, you know, his inability to get footing the way he would want to, and he kills a lion.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Benaiah. Wow.
So there's a picture of not cowardice, of courage, and he uses his courage in the service of the king, King David. So yeah, he's been a fascinating person to me.
Awesome. I love it. Do you have a favorite book of the Bible?
Ephesians. I love Ephesians. Yeah. Ephesians is one of those books, like almost every single verse is worthy of memorization. I mean, you could say the whole Bible is worthy of memorization, and that would be a true statement. Right. But, you know, just for using in your personal meditation, your daily life, like Ephesians is just that book. I mean, from its opening verses about all these spiritual blessings we've received to the way God brings his salvation by grace into our lives individually, and then how that works itself out corporately, you know, tearing down the division between Jew and Gentile, to the great prayer at the end of chapter 3 about knowing the love of God that surpasses knowledge, pivoting into chapter 4 through 6, talking about sanctification, just all these really practical aspects of what it means to put off your old self, put on your new self. And the book ends with that really helpful passage about spiritual warfare and what it means to fight. It's like every bit of that book is just like so helpful, and it's my favorite. I love Ephesians.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you have a favorite verse? You might have a few, but
yeah, I've had different favorite verses over the years. I mean, currently, for the last few years, my favorite verse has been Isaiah 33:17. That your eyes shall behold the King in his beauty and see a land that stretches afar. And it's a prophecy of the Christ, our King, Jesus. And I believe the new heavens and the new earth is going to be the fulfillment of that land promise. So we're going to see the King in his beauty and his land that stretches afar. I mean, that is our destination in Christ. And the coming of Christ that brings all of that in is our hope, Scripture says. So that's just really captivated my imagination, my heart. It's encouraged me. I can't wait to see our King. Can't wait to see the new heavens, the new earth.
Yeah, I know that's true, because I can say in countless sermons, you know, I've heard you preach on that very thing. All right, let's see. I know you mentioned, you know, Fridays is your day off. You spend it with family. What do you like to do on your day off? What do you like to do with family? What are things you like to enjoy to do in your free time?
Yeah, I mean, usually that the weekend, like Friday and then part of Saturday, there's going to be some house projects that I need to get done. So I do that. I love being my kids. My kids are so fun. I actually have the responsibility of helping my youngest daughter right now with one of her classes in school. So every weekend we work on that class together. And we like to be outdoors as a family, and we don't get to do that all the time, but, you know, weather permitting, like if we can get outside, that's what we like to do. Like just being outside, working in the yard, playing in the driveway, or we'll go hiking somewhere. Or now that our kids are getting older, it's been easier to actually go like exercise and run trails, be out on the trails together. Yeah. And we like to eat. My wife is an awesome cook. That's part of her background, actually. And so we usually enjoy a good meal together. And those are pretty staple things for us on a weekend.
Awesome. Okay, so if you could have dinner with 5 people, dead or alive, who would they be?
Oh, there's another, let me get back to you in a week question. Because I'm gonna lay in bed tonight, Sam, and I'm gonna think, oh, this is how I should have answered that question. Right.
This is showing David King as the intellect. You don't want to flippantly come up with some answer.
That's right. And I mean, that's like a weakness in me for sure. It's like I've got to think through everything and make sure I give just the right answer. Yeah, that's a weakness.
It's okay. You don't have to come up with a.
Yeah.
We'll let you mull it
I have to mull it up. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. This is really honestly been such a pleasure sitting down and hearing from you. So once again, thank you so much. This is our first episode, and I'm so honored and proud to be able to have that with you. Before we leave, tell people how they can get plugged in with Concord.
Yeah, so right now, if you want to get to know Concord, I would say you could check us out on Facebook. If you're not getting out and about, we have a live stream at 9:00 on Sunday mornings. Occasionally that goes wrong and we pitch to 11:00, but usually that's at 9:00. It's not a TV production. It just is what it is, but you get a sense of the kinds of songs that we sing in worship and how we pray and how we handle God's word. Even better would be come on campus and join us. And you can find out how our service structure works by going on our website. We've got a 9 and 11:00 service. We've got gym options where you can be a little bit more social distance and wear a mask and feel comfortable. But if you could get on campus and actually get around people and meet people, I mean, that is ideal. We're about to start back a Wednesday night Bible study that I'll teach on March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And that's another fun way to get connected where you could meet people and have conversation over God's word. And those would probably be the best ways right now.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. When the time comes, maybe if we have something else that, we can talk about, we can, address some of those questions once you've come up with
my perfect answer.
But, I'd love to do a part 2, but this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. This has been a joy.
All right. Well, with that, I'll talk to you soon.
All
right. Bye.
Bye.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at theweirdchristianpodcast@gmail.com. Let me know if you or somebody you know would make for a good guest on the show. And with that being said, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.